This is the Criminal Justice Study meeting. First of all, I'd like a couple announcements. We will be getting further details about moderating the panel discussion on the Ninian Everett's uh, statue, which is Wednesday, December the 2nd.
Right.
Thursday, December the 3rd is the league board meeting. And Thursday, December the 10th is our holiday party. So bring your ugly sweater, your pretty t-shirt, something that you've made for show and tell and just for congeniality. So now I'm going to turn the meeting over to Carol Jr.
Okay. So Carol Gert and John Harvey are not getting on tonight, couldn't get on tonight, or they're not getting on. I thought I didn't speak to John. He asked which question I wanted him to do, and I suggested one. Carol, I spoke with her, but I probably did not go over the process good enough with her because I think they were feeling like they didn't exactly know what we were doing. So that leaves, and Susan could not join us tonight. So that leaves those questions not covered. I suggest we cover the questions of the people who are on here who prepared a question. And then if we have time, we can go back if we want to and look at theirs by reading the material that the State League gave us, or else we can put those for a later date. Does that work?
That sounds like a plan.
Okay, so Jane is going to do question 2. You're on, Jane.
Okay. All right. So I'm another person that didn't really know what I was doing, but I was plunging ahead anyway. So my question is number 2, bias in the criminal justice system. The existing position is none. And here's the question. Should there be periodic training for individuals working in the criminal justice system to recognize implicit racial and ethnic bias in order to more adequately work toward the goal of equal treatment under the law? Okay, so the state has done a lot of work apparently already on this. And it seems like it was based on the Illinois State Commission on Criminal Justice and Sentencing Reform. Apparently, Governor Bruce Rauner set up this commission to study the issue in the hopes of reducing incarceration in our state. And so this Illinois State Commission did a lot of study and made a report. And that it seems to form the basis of the league's work because they reference it a lot. So they give a pro and a con position. And so pro says the 5th recommendation from the Illinois State Commission on Criminal Justice and Sentencing Reform states, require periodic training on recognizing implicit racial and ethnic bias for individuals working in the criminal justice system, including but not limited to law enforcement officers, prosecutors, public defenders, probation officers, judges, and correctional staff. And it says their rationale is found on pages 30 and 31 of this Illinois State Commission report. So they say, because our criminal justice system is predicated on the importance of equal treatment under the law, it is imperative that the significant racial disparities that exist in the justice system be addressed. Okay, so the pro rationale, and well, I don't know if I need to read every bit of this. Doesn't everybody pretty much know what implicit bias is? Do I need to read an explanation?
I think so.
It's your you do not.
Go ahead and,
Is that no, I shouldn't read it or
go ahead, and then we'll know for sure that we're on the same page with you.
okay. Implicit bias is the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Implicit bias can include favorable or unfavorable attitudes about particular groups. It can occur without people's knowledge. That means your own knowledge. As unintentional. All individuals are susceptible to implicit bias, including those who consciously hold tolerant or egalitarian beliefs. So consciously, you may be a very fair-minded person, dedicated to equality and justice and so on, but unconsciously, you have picked up biases from the culture that you grew up in. And so even unbeknownst to you, you have these biases deep down in your subconscious. So it says these mental shortcuts, they call them, can produce generalizations about particular groups that result in disparate decision-making and treatment. In a criminal justice context, implicit bias can result in the unconscious automatic association of people of color with crime, which can in turn influence decisions affecting the use of force, arrest, prosecution, defense, diversion, and conviction, sentencing, and the supervision of those who are under correctional control. So, okay, those are kind of the stakes that are there. But it says, although implicit bias occurs unconsciously, research has also found that purposeful actions or controlled responses can be used to supersede these automatic associations, that implicit bias can be counteracted by training and practice. This training and practice can affect not only thoughts, but actions, including a person's decision-making in highly stressful settings. Studies on implicit bias as it relates to police and citizen decisions to shoot armed or unarmed suspects, for instance, indicate that implicit biases can be overridden even during potentially life-threatening events. So it says, given the importance of the equal treatment under the law and the significant presence of racial disparities in the justice system, time spent addressing implicit bias is time well spent. Training and practice that encourages individuals to focus on behavioral cues versus stereotypic associations, and that exposes people to counter stereotypic information, hold promise, because mindfulness can provoke individuals to deliberately consider alternative responses that reflect their consciously held beliefs. So this Illinois Commission is recommending that all individuals in the criminal justice system should be trained on implicit racial and ethnic bias. And it says this is consistent with efforts throughout the United States at all levels of government to address impact of bias in the justice system. And they also, okay, in addition to that Illinois Commission, they cite the Ohio State University Kirwan Institute, which says, we generally tend to hold implicit biases that favor our own in-group. Though research has shown we can still hold implicit biases and get against our in-group. Implicit biases are malleable. Our brains are incredibly complex, and the implicit associations we have formed can gradually be unlearned through a variety of de-biasing techniques. So that's the information that they gave us on the pro side of this. And I have footnotes for some of the stuff I read. I don't know that you want me to read you all these footnotes, but it's documented.
Is there any con?
Yes,
Is there anything against it?
here's the con. The con, it says, broad-based training detracts from the work that employees are hired to do. This training is sometimes ineffective and therefore not worth the expense. That's it. That's the con, and there's no documentation. So, okay, I didn't exactly know what I was doing, but I just started Googling implicit bias training and to see what I could come up with. And so there are quite a few articles. Most of them are not clearly pro or con. They usually are, it's kind of like on the one hand this, and on the other hand that. So there's a little pro and con in most all of the articles that I saw.
Maybe there are like in
Okay, I'm not sure what you're saying.
Try again, Chris. That wasn't.
well, I'm saying, can you hear me okay?
Yes, now it's
I'm
okay.
sorry I came in late, but I was watching the recent poll that was conducted by I don't know who the pollsters are, but it shows that 74% of Republicans believe that the election was a fraud. Okay, something tells me there's some implicit biases that are involved with that. But what I'm saying is that some of the studies that you're talking about, may or may not be. How do you know that they're not implicit? Okay, but whatever we're trying to accomplish here, to ensure that, enforcement officers are kind of learn not to be biased when they're dealing with a law enforcement situation. So
Jane, did you have some more examples of the con of what they said?
Well, I thought one interesting article was an article by, I guess it might have been on the radio, it was NPR, National Public Radio. It was just done in September, so it's very current. And the title of it is NYPD Study, Implicit Bias Training Changes Minds, Not Necessarily Behavior. And so one of the pros, or well, no, this is a con. This is a con and a pro. There is little real life research into whether it changes officers on the job. But a new study by the NYPD studies the effects of mandatory implicit bias training that it implemented in 2018. It found that officers were more aware and more willing to try to manage it. But there was no meaningful change in the numbers showing ethnic disparities among people arrested or in other interactions. And they had a little chart. I doubt if you can read that online, but
Not really.
Okay. So the little chart, the first says enforcement actions involving Black people, pre-training and post-training. So of their stops, pre-training, 56% of the people they stopped were Black people. Post-training, 57%. Frisked, people who were frisked in their stop. Pre-training, it was 58% Black people. After training, it was 60% Black people. Summonses. Pre-training, 52% of their summonses were to Black people. After the training, it was 50%. So it went down 2%. And among arrests, pre-training, 47% were Black people, and after training, it was 48%. So as you can see, there was hardly any change at all. Then there's the same set of comparisons among Hispanic people. Stops, 31% and 31%. It did not change at all, pre and post. Frisks, also 31% and 31%. Summonses before training was 31%, after training was 34%, and arrests stayed the same at 35% pre and post. So that was kind of discouraging to read.
I'd say something about those
Yeah.
statistics. All those things you read off may not have changed much, but really sort of the thrust of this question is whether training would, I think, make police officers, law enforcement people treat people more equitably. They may still be arresting as many or, frisk and whatever, but maybe through this training, they might treat them better.
They might be more civil in their interactions. Yeah. And somebody, I think, mentioned that in one of these studies.
I'd like to chime in something about that too, because in the years I spent in a corporate setting, we were required, every employee was required to go through implicit bias training. But implicit bias training by itself may make you rethink your attitude, but it will not change behavior. But with other measures, it will make those other measures seem more reasonable. Like if you have certain hiring guidelines you have to follow and you have taken implicit bias training, then those hiring guidelines make more sense to you, and that's where your behavior gets enforced. So implicit bias training will not change behavior. I agree with that, but expecting that it will change behavior is not the right question.
Yeah.
I listened to an Injustice podcast, and the professor that does this podcast talked about this. And one of the things that he said is they mandate it in when they go through training and if they feel they need to present it again. He said that he sat in on them, and he could see immediately the people that would get something out of it, or something that, or they wouldn't, because their attitude, they didn't want to be there. It was one of the things that they didn't think they needed to be there for. So that might make a difference of how they feel afterwards, because they're angry that they had to do this and they don't see anything wrong with what they're doing.
Yeah. Somebody in one of these studies mentioned that having mandatory trainings can cause resistance. And I think that's true. But at any rate, yeah.
Well, I don't know how to do the timing on this, how much time we're going to give to each one. Is there any other point that you really need to make, Jane? And then, so people don't have to come to consensus tonight.
Right. I want to make one comment, if I may,
Okay.
please.
Yes.
On that con, it says the training is sometimes ineffective and therefore not worth the expense. Well, the point there is not to drop it, but to improve the quality of the training.
And I thought a key word there was sometimes,
Mhm.
sometimes ineffective.
And again, this is training that only is meant to change your attitude and your perception. It is not meant to change behavior. So you have to pair it with something that reinforces behavioral change.
I don't think it's really reasonable, if I could add something, to expect that kind of training to necessarily alone change people's behavior.
Right.
Maybe it's a beginning. I also think, well, personally, that departments have to have some sort of actual disciplinary organization. They have to have a system to discipline people who actually behave in ways that are violent or racist. But I think what we're trying, I'm to me, maybe asking the training alone to change people's behaviors, asking too much, but is it still useful? I guess that's to me the question.
It's a
Yeah.
first thing.
I kind of thought in the question, it says, should there be periodic training? And I think that's key too. I think you once and done, that's not going to do it. You just check the box one time. No, this has got to be an ongoing process of, and somebody in one of the articles said police constantly get training on guns and all these other techniques. And you think one implicit bias training is going to take care of implicit bias? It's not likely,
It's really like any kind of training. It has to be reinforced in multiple ways through policies, like Becky was saying, and subsequent training. So continued rewards and the opposite of rewards too for that behavior as
Well,
it is
I
observed.
think, I'm sorry, thought you were done.
Go ahead, Kathy.
I was going to say that a lot of times the problem, from what I've been hearing, is that when a cop does something bad or horrible and he gets reprimanded for it, the unions are so powerful that they allow them to come back in and they support them to get back in there, or they just, if they get fired and they can't get back in, they go to another place, another state or another town that's nearby. And so Austin just changed some laws this last election. And part of it is they looked at the unions and they changed things by changing the way the police unions, the power that they had to incorporate the people that continue to have bad behavior. They changed it around so that they wouldn't tolerate some of the things. And I don't know exactly what they did. I didn't go into their study, but that they had just mentioned it, and it was just passed in this last election. But they had, from what I had heard, they worked at least 8 years to get the change that was needed to get some of the changes that they wanted within their department.
Right. Just to quickly touch a couple other things, and I think maybe you're getting at some of these other things. One of the big cons, one guy said, it's something that's easy to do and it gives police a good PR and like we're doing something important, and yet other things are let go. Other problems are not being addressed, such as the community, which allows concentrated poverty and, housing policies and so on. All of these big problems are just festering. And we're saying, okay, we're going to solve the problem with implicit bias training. But I think most of them pretty much came to the conclusion that the training is a good thing. It's not the entire answer. If it changes people's minds, even if it doesn't change their behavior, and if it starts them to thinking and processing their own, do reflections, that it could moderate their behavior over the long haul, and that the stakes are so high, that the police have so much power, they have such lethal weaponry on them. And it talked about, people with especially dark skin are stereotypically Black characteristics are more likely to be convicted. They're more likely to get harsher sentences. They're more likely to get capital punishment. And so the stakes are terrifically high. And we can't leave our police, our judges, our prosecutors, and all these people ignorant of these biases. So even though it may not completely solve the problem, it may not be the whole answer, it's something that we need to have. So I think, I can stop there, but there's lots
Okay.
of stuff here. I could go on and on.
Well, I think that's going to be true on every question that we have. And my hopes is that we can get the league members thinking about the issues. And then if you find that you still have more questions, then you'll know that you want to do more research, or you can, reach back to the person who covered the question or something. Because we're going to be limited, on how much we can go into everything here. We could do a whole Zoom on every
Right.
topic, I'm sure. So Jane, thank you very much. That covered it really good, I thought, and gave us a lot of information in.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So now the third question is to Barb and Brent. They were going to cover 3 and 5, so you're up.
I'll take 3. And hello, everybody.
Hello.
My name is Brent, by the way, for Barb's husband, her better half. I'm going to be discussing the consensus question of should a gender responsive approach be used for all offenders with the goal of equitable and appropriate treatment. And just as with Jane's, in discussing the pros, this write-up references the Illinois State Commission on Criminal Justice and Sentencing Reform, and one of its recommendations called for a gender responsive approach for female offenders. The League of Women Voters expanded that, recognizing there are other populations other than just females that have special needs and concerns, namely the LGBTQ community. So that Illinois State Commission report had 4 subsets to the gender responsive approach, and they are to implement a gender responsive risk assessment tool to assist in determining the appropriate treatment of, it says female offenders, but you could say all offenders, I guess, and would surely increase the opportunities for diversion from incarceration. The second point was implement the women offender case management model or similar evidence-based gender responsive model. And the third is to adopt model disciplinary policies tailored to female inmates. You could also say to LGBTQ inmates, to reduce disciplinary infractions that lengthen prison terms due to the loss of sentencing credits. And their fourth item was implement gender responsive trauma-informed treatment programs to assist, it says women, but also other inmates, in gaining the needed rehabilitation and support they need for successful return to society. The discussion of the pros also gets into something called the Prison Rape Elimination Act, which was passed by Congress in 2003, and it had several different standards relating to housing, protective custody, and segregating, for instance, LGBTQs in their own special pods or units, and staff training. It points out that a lot of harassment and abusive treatment of women and LGBTQ people happens in prisons, not only from other inmates, but from the staff also. So that's basically the pros that are discussed in here. The con is written to say some inmates would object to transgendered people being transferred to their prison. There's a safety issue and cost issue in accommodating transgendered people. So that's basically what is in this document.
Did they give some examples of like what some of the issues might be? Like I know pregnant women is one issue, you know, how, you know, like that's an issue that most male, you know, all male prisoners and no male prisoner probably is going to have to deal with being pregnant, you know, and how is that, should they be treated differently, you know, or how, you know, against that, that way? Are there some other examples of how they're?
Well, it didn't address treatment for people that, for instance, might be pregnant. It does have some statistics that, for instance, females are more likely to be the sole, have a sole custody of children, which is an issue. And that they have a lower recidivism rate than men. But, you know, some of these things that they're advocating would further lower recidivism. If people are treated correctly and have good training and they address whatever physical problems they might have, that would improve their chances of being successful, I would think, when they're released from prison.
So
Greg,
read
could you
that
read the
question
question one
again.
more time?
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
Should a gender responsive approach be used for all offenders with the goal of equitable and appropriate treatment?
It just seems like a no-brainer, really.
So are they talking about actually separating them? Is that the gender approach? What approach are they talking
They
about?
don't get into details to that extent, you know.
What do they mean by equitable?
Well, it doesn't explain that. I would think it means that that they're treated equally in the sense that, you know, some might be treated unequally, like LGBTQ people, for instance. It also points out, you know, one of the cons was the cost, but there's a cost of not treating people properly, and then they can't cope when they're released. So that adds cost to society.
He and I just talked a little bit about the fact that if they did have like certain places or certain prisons just for these certain kind of people, it would kind of isolate them, because let's say they were all up by Chicago and the person was down from Carbondale. Well, then their family couldn't visit them easily. So then you have the issue of if they're in the actual Carbondale area for their prison, can they afford, or is there a place in that prison that they can make them separate, which would mean, you know, where would they have a exercise place that wouldn't be for everybody else? You know, it just, I don't see how it would work. I don't understand what their proposal would be.
And equitable doesn't really, you know, some of the issues get really complicated. Like, for instance, a transgender person, say someone who now identifies as female, but was born biologically male. Okay, that person becomes incarcerated. Do you put that person in a male prison or a female prison?
Or isolate them on their own.
Yes, and
Which is another issue.
It becomes kind of, and it becomes pretty complicated. And I'm not sure you can have a universal rule for that, especially if the person, you know, how far along they are on that trans journey.
And to me, the term separate but equal does not feel right.
Mhm.
You know, it's like, how can it be separate but equal? Is it isolationism? Is it, you know, what if you're separating them, how do you make it equal? I don't know.
And they can't be just talking about separation because male and female prisoners now are separated.
I was-
Okay, that seems like a no-brainer.
Already different, there's already different institutions, whether you're male or female.
Yeah,
Right, so that's already separate, and who knows if it's equal? I mean, it would be probably quite different, honestly.
yeah.
And
And
maybe it could
from
be.
the prose you were reading, it sounds more like they're thinking only of female anyway. So I'm kind of confused what the questions really, what we're really grappling with here.
I don't know, when I was reading over some of these materials, they were talking quite a bit about the transgender and there's a Prison Rape Elimination Act, and they're talking about transgender people in that too. So in a way, to me, they almost had more on, in what I was reading here, more on the gender identity than they did on women.
Oh, okay.
But the consensus question is all offenders. So it's not specifying any one group.
And maybe there's not intended to be a solution to all the problems in this question, but the sense that studies should identify the problems and then it should be understood that more of an effort should be made to address them. I mean, that's really vague, I know, but it seems pretty vague. But the idea that you say, yes, there are issues that are specific to women, there are issues that are specific to transgender people, to I've lost all the letters. And that these things should be recognized and studied and addressed. I mean, because I don't think that the question in and of itself
Yeah, I'm thinking that,
we should
you
do.
know, when our Constitution had an amendment to provide equal protection under the law. Okay, that's a pretty broad statement. They didn't have to work out all the details of every situation that might come up.
Right. I
There
think I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just a general principle.
I think one of the things, you know, like say, for instance, like domestic violence, men might be, so you might look at what a woman might commit a crime, maybe even a murder, you know, of someone, but it could be reversed, but I'm sure statistics will show it's more women that are victims of domestic violence. But how did that play into the crime that she committed? You know, the domestic violence against her as a woman. Right. And
Right.
also, like, I think statistics, I think it said that show that more women with mental issues, the prisoners, you know, or something. I mean, that there's certain things that women might get them incarcerated more because they're women. So then do you treat that sentencing the same? You know, Rachel, what do you think? I see you.
I had that same issue. I can't remember was US, what did they mean by equal? I'm actually concerned about the equal, which I didn't quite understand, because really you don't want it to be precisely equal. You want it to be very specialized according to the person. Because the circumstances might be different and a person's situation might be different. And I can see gender as a lot of other factors can play into that. I think it was you, Carol, that was having that, like, what do they mean by equal? Because in a funny way, I felt like was concerned me, I think, like it did you. Like, I don't know that everyone should precisely always be equally treated. They should be treated according to their specific needs, which might really not be equal.
Well, maybe by equal, maybe there are some people that'll say, you know, like in sports, they always had the men's sports got more money than the women's sports. So maybe the men's prison get more money than the women's prison. You know, I mean, maybe that's what they mean in equal treatment, you know, or men's health gets, you know, women's health is like considering their specific, you know, sexual issues that women have, you know, so they get as much, you know, money, or that's taken into consideration when you're allotting, you know, money. So the equal is that women and people with gender, different gender identities don't get the short end of the stick when it comes to funding and programs, you know. So I think, you know, that, because I think that could be an issue. You know, we don't give the women and other people as money, as good of programs or as much counseling or something, you know.
How does the word equitable? Does that mean fair but not exactly equal? I mean,
Equitable is, the difference between like equitable and, you know, like, have you ever seen that chart? And this was like with school funding, you have the picture where you have the 3 people looking over a fence, a tall fence that's taller than all of them. And one, you know, so they're on different size boxes. And so if you gave them equal funding, the one on the lowest box still might not get raised up high enough to see over the fence. They need how much that they all need to be raised to get over. So that's what equitable funding might not mean. Everybody gets $100. Some person might only need $25 to get their needs met. Someone else might need $75. So that would be an equitable distribution. And I
Maybe-
think, you know,
Maybe fair is a better word. Fair and appropriate treatment. I think equitable can mean that also.
yeah.
so we might, so maybe, you know, that might be something if you have more, you don't, any of the questions that you're not prepared to vote, you know, we won't vote. So when we do the consensus meeting, we'll read the question. Do we read pros and cons at that meeting, Joanne? Or we just read the question and ask for consensus and discussion?
Well, we can just ask for the discussion. If they want more specifics, we can give pros and
Okay.
cons.
Okay, so if you don't think you're prepared to just a minute, Chris, if you don't think you're prepared to put your consensus in on that one way or the other, then that would be an issue you would need to look more at. Chris?
Well, I just wanted to remind people, it's my understanding of equitable is inherent in what Abraham Lincoln said, that all men are created equal with certain inalienable rights. And that should be, you know,
That was Thomas Jefferson.
the Sierra Club now, you know, is accusing John Muir essentially of not being very good to people of color. And so they're changing their whole policies towards reaching out in an equitable way to low income people of color, and not just Black people, but whatever. So that's where equitable comes in as far as what the Sierra Club is trying to accomplish in response to the Black Lives Matter activity, which inspired a lot of this rhetoric. Good rhetoric, by the way. So that's my thing.
Carol? We can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
Did you hear me?
We heard you. Yes, thank you for comment.
Oh, good.
But we can't hear Carol. Can you put it in the chat box?
Put it in the chat box.
Carol, you have to unmute.
She has
is.
volume problems on her computer. It's,
Yeah.
Carol, can you type it into the chat?
I don't know if she can hear us either. Give us a sign if
Well,
you can
she
hear
can
us.
hear, she just can't, we can't
Oh.
hear her.
Well, some of these things can get very detailed as far as equitable. Like I think it brought up in something here. I mean, are we obliged to pay for gender altering surgery and so forth when somebody's incarcerated?
Yeah.
In order to be equitable?
Okay, Carol typed in something in the chat, said, in consensus form can make, wait.
Comments, can make comments about the question.
Okay,
Right.
Mhm.
So for instance, if we
Okay.
agree maybe with most of it, but not all of it, then
Oh,
we
yes, you could do
then
that,
we
right.
can say that, you know. Or like, so like even Sylvia, you know, the question, if we can come to consensus on most of it, but not part of it, then we could put that in there.
Right.
Can I respond to what Sylvia just said?
Yeah,
Well, if we're talking about being equitable, and there's a medical decision taking place as far as whether or not surgery should take place, I think to be equitable, you need to, or whoever the people are involved in making the decision, they need to think about, well, if this was my mother, if this was my father, all right, how would I want this person to be treated? To be equitable, the surgery should take place and it should be done in a reasonable way. That's my thought.
Are we ready to move on to question number 5?
yes, that puts you in the spotlight.
I would like
Doesn't
to make a comment first.
Okay,
There was,
Jan.
Kathy Creed sent an email that her screen froze up twice or something. And she wants to know, are we recording this, Becky?
yes, we are, and I
Yes.
responded to her and told we
Oh, okay,
we are.
fine. I
So
didn't know.
I'll upload this either to the Google Drive or to our YouTube channel, whichever one seems to work better, and then I'll send out a link to everybody so everybody can come back and look at it.
Sorry I interrupted. All right.
No, good, good.
Okay, can I get an idea? Do we have a time frame, 8 o'clock, 8:30, what, Joanne?
I don't have a time frame. I'm assuming about an hour,
Okay, well,
over an hour probably would be enough, but I don't know. Becky, do we have to be off by a certain time?
No, no,
okay, Barb, well, why don't you go ahead and then we'll see where we're at.
Okay. My question, I'm not going to talk about the question yet. I'm just going to talk to you about the Criminal Justice Coordinating Councils, the CJCC. And then we'll talk about the questions after I tell you what they are. So the Criminal Justice Coordinating Councils are councils that were formed back, the first one was formed back in 1930 in Los Angeles. There are 3,000 counties in the United States, and right now there are less than 100 CJCCs. These councils are all connected directly to the counties. So each county would, if they wanted one, would have it for the county unit. In Illinois, there are 102 counties with 24 judicial courts. So involved in the coordinating councils are a variety of memberships. A lot of different people can be involved. It's supposed to be working out in criminal justice, which goes from police to parole, but there's also a lot of other entities that might be involved in these councils. So in 2017, according to this sheet that we've all been reading to prepare for this meeting, 5 counties in Illinois were granted monies, resources to create one of these councils. Those 5 counties were Lake, McHenry, McLean, Winnebago, and St. Clair. So what I tried to do is try to find out if any of those counties had any minutes or anything explaining what they've been doing or whatever, because that's been, 3 years. So let's see what they've done. The only thing I could find was one that was already in the link of this thing, and that was for McLean County. And they did a study and they did a lot of information gathering, and they determined certain things that did help their county reduce the amount of people in prison. It was a study, and they figured out that there were a lot of people who had lower level crimes, and those people were being put in prison because they couldn't afford $100 bail. So they rearranged everything and did some stuff so they could not go in, and then they could stay out and keep their job and feed their families and still, as long as they reported to court when it was time for the good court, then they didn't have to stay in prison for 8 months waiting for their court time to come up. So it was a great study, and it was a great benefit to the county. So I'm going to give you a little bit about what the goals, actions, and membership of a council would be. The goals are to guide the better use of criminal justice resources, to restore the cost of the criminal, to reduce the cost of the criminal justice system, and to devise more effective and sustainable criminal justice. Sorry, somebody say something? To devise more efficient and sustainable criminal justice initiatives and programs. So those would be the goal of one of these councils. Guide better use of resources, reduce costs, and devise more effective procedures. Actions that they would do in order to create their effective council would be to collect data and analyze the criminal justice operations, identify most pervasive problems, collaborate towards solutions, and develop budget strategies. The membership would vary based on what they were trying to reduce, what the problem was. So membership would probably be like the courts and the police, the normal, what you would consider criminal justice, but also might include substance use and mental health treatment providers, victims advocates, housing resources, workforce training and educational assistance, veteran advocates, faith-based groups, offenders' rights groups, and former offenders. So that's kind of what a council would be. And now I'm going to read you the questions that we need to address for those kinds of councils. There are several questions. One is, should Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, CJCCs, be created throughout the state? That would mean 102 different councils, one for each county. The next question they ask is, should CJCCs include a wide representation from local justice systems, agencies, other government bodies, service providers, and the community? The third one is, should incentives and support be provided for the establishment of local CJCCs to assist them as they develop strategic plans to address crime and corrections policy? And the fourth one is, should there be cooperation and coordination between the state and CJCCs in order to share experience and data with the goal of improving plans to address crime and corrections policies, both locally and statewide? So starting again at the very first one, it says, should it be created throughout the state? And there are a lot of, as I think all the rest of you found, the document that we were given by the state had a lot of pros and then just kind of threw out a cons. So you have to kind of figure out, is there a con? What's going on with this? And it is true that these councils, if they were effective and efficient and actually were staffed and resourced, that they could very readily find specific problems for each county and could be very instrumental in reducing problems and perhaps, reducing prison time, etc. But then it goes on to say, should it include a wide representation? That's the next question. That's one of the reasons why they're county driven, is because I would think that the counties around Chicago would have different issues than the counties around Carbondale. I don't know, but I'm guessing that that's the case. So if the question about having wide representation, it's just kind of like, okay, let's open this up and say, what is the problem first? And then if the problem is the people are stealing because they don't have a house, then we need to have housing people to come in to help us. So it would be a kind of including whoever you needed based on the problems you identify. Should incentives and support be provided for these councils? If you don't have any money to support these, it's a waste of time. You know, why even bother to say you have one if you don't have any money? I could not find anything about anybody that's doing anything, even though they have 5 counties. I just Googled, I don't know how to find them. Maybe there's some police database someplace, but I didn't see anything showing what they're doing. Now I did find in St. Clair, the county clerk, I think is her title, from St. Clair is on the state council that is in charge of every county that might have one. And she is on there because that state one has to have a certain representation, and at least one person has to be from an out county, not in Chicago. So that she's the representative from, you know, someplace else. And St. Clair does have a juvenile CJCC. So it's only juvenile. It's not countywide. It's not whatever problem comes up. It's only juvenile. So apparently they have decided that they need to have any resources that they can gather towards the juveniles. The last statement is, should there be cooperation, coordination between the state and CJCCs? And obviously, if you can figure out, if you really do a good job and you analyze the data and you figure out a solution to it, you would definitely want to share that with everybody, not even just in Illinois. You want to share with anybody who wanted to hear us. If in fact you can figure out how to reduce the drug rate or reduce whatever that's causing the people to be arrested, you'd want to share how you solved that problem. Just like what McLean County did in 2017. Again, I haven't seen anything, other products coming out, but if you can find the problem, if you can identify it, you should be able to share it. But that costs a lot of money to start data analysis and typing things in. And so in order to have one of these councils in every single county, it would cost, I think, a lot of money, because you'd have to have somebody who would not only be setting up meetings, be doing the studies, be doing the analysis, be gathering people that you needed the resources from various nonprofits, perhaps. It would be a lot of work. And so you couldn't just say, well, that person over there sitting there, let them do it in their spare time. If you're going to have one of these councils and it's going to be effective, you got to give them money, and you got to give them some kind of training and how to do data analysis. You got to make it work. So from my perspective, obviously from like a philosophical standpoint, it'd be really great to have these councils in every single county. And it'd be wonderful if they could identify all these problems and figure out how to fix them. And it'd be great if they could incorporate all these different memberships in order to produce the resolution that you're looking for. But the whole thing starts with, if you don't have training, money, places to people that know what they're doing, it's just like a waste of paper to write up saying you have a council.
I'd like to make.
Do we have any idea what the cost is now of the councils that exist? And I know that's without all the coordination and data gathering, just the councils.
The way I understand it, and I don't understand it very well, I'm not trying to become I know I'm not an expert, don't get me wrong, but the way I understand it, you have to write a grant. So that's another thing you got to have, somebody who can write a grant and apply for a grant. And so you say, okay, I want to study this. And then you send up this thing to this statewide committee, and then they grant you this money to study whatever it is you're going to study.
So there's no state budget. It's all grant funded right now.
That's what it looks like. I didn't see anything established, but that's one of the questions really, is should we provide resources to these councils?
Jane?
But
How did those 5 happen to come into existence? Did they initiate it themselves, or?
The way I understand it, that big long report that everybody's using for the source for this, it just said that they decided they were going to pick 5, and they picked 4 that were up. Well, they said one, McLean was down south. That's Bloomington.
Yeah.
So I don't consider that down south, but and so St. Clair was really the far south one that they chose. And as far as I can tell, nothing really has come out of it except for the
You know-
McLean one.
Well,
So,
I'd
Chris,
like,
did they take the initiative to write a grant proposal to ask?
I don't think so. I think that they somehow or other, I don't know how they got selected. But it didn't sound like they did anything special to get the selection, other than maybe said, I'll volunteer to do it. Or
But
something
this is just
that.
like a pilot project.
It was just a pilot project. They picked 5 and all of them, there were like 3 that were right around Chicago. And then there was McLean and Bloomington and then St. Clair.
well, I would, there's 2 things, but one thing is on money. So it's what money you put up front. You know, it costs money to hold people in our jails. You know, it costs money to have the courts open, that people that have to keep coming back to court and doing probation and everything. So the purpose of these councils is to keep people out of the system. And so you're going to save money by keeping people out of the system. So do you say, well, we don't invest this money, you know, but we're still going to go. Now, if it's a private prison, they're going to say, we want to make money, you know, now I don't think the county jail is getting private, but it costs every day to house those prisoners, you know, and people. And also it's cost to your community. If people are coming out of your community and going to jail and coming back into prison, you don't have a stable community. So, you know, it's like when you have a big corporation that's polluting the environment and you say, well, it's cheaper if we do it this way, but you're not including the external costs, you know, so I think we have to look at it that way when it comes to money. Chris?
I hear what you're saying. My question is, as far as money is concerned, I don't believe that grants are going to do it because grants are so ridiculously difficult to prepare and expensive. But if the governor, can I finish? If the governor is behind it and he's got staff who are willing or are working on this, you know, the money's got to come from the state, and the climate in this state right now is definitely potentially favorable. So it's a matter of, I know we didn't get yes on the fair tax, which would have helped to bring, you know, more resources to bear, but still, this is a big problem, and I think it's great that the league is pushing for it. But I think to get it, there's going to have to be some political action to lobby for it, you know, from people.
Does the question ask us to decide what anything about money? I mean, it's a legitimate question, but does the question include anything about how this will be
It says, should
funded?
criminal justice coordinating councils be created throughout the state? It doesn't really say provide money for them, but it says,
should incentives.
It doesn't really, that I see, yeah.
Incentives and
oh,
what?
there, number 5C,
Yeah.
incentives and support.
I had a question.
Before you go to a question, let me just make a statement, and that is that this council could theoretically help with our other questions. You know, they could theoretically find out, are there transgender or women problems in my
Is there
county? that
equitable
need to be
treatment?
addressed?
Yeah.
Yes, is the bias training helping or not helping? You know, they could actually address some of those issues. So they could be, if they were resourced well, an avenue to answer the other question. So what was the other question?
Depends on who was on the meeting. I don't want to be too cynical, but I have a position that if you simply mandate that every county forms one and is funded, it really could fund a bunch of people sitting around doing absolutely hardly anything or nothing that you and I would necessarily find valuable. I personally think that if there's money that the state's going to offer, that it should honestly be meted out according to the kinds of questions. Can anybody hear me? Oh,
Yes.
According to the kinds of questions the county wants to ask. I mean, if there isn't a truly investigative approach, it wouldn't be a good expenditure. And I don't know how you would guarantee that each and every county would approach this in the way we would like them to approach it. Right. I mean, if each and every county is going to go, oh, how are our transgender prisoners doing? Oh my gosh, could we have too many Black people in jail? I just don't see that naturally happening. If you simply say, well, you have to form a committee and here's the dough. I think that actually having a good, well, I give as an example that out of 5, we know really of only 1 that at least was able to make public what they did. But they had a question. I mean, they had a really good question. And of course, if a county does have a good question like that, I would feel like it would be really worth funding any group of people who wanted to dig in. I'm just not really a believer that every single county in Illinois has a group of people that want to dig into those particular types of questions. And if you're mandated every county to form a committee and just give them money without the really any requirement that a question has been, I mean, they might go into the question of like, you know, how can we fund the police benevolent board, or, you know, what I'm saying? I mean, not everybody really wants to dig into the thorny issues of justice, criminal justice.
But you know what?
Barb and I are having a little bit of a difference of opinion. It depends on how you interpret this, but it says, should they be created throughout the state? It doesn't say every county would have to have one necessarily.
I think it was funded according to who has a good question.
Or whoever.
Right.
You know, then that would make a load of sense to me.
Sylvia, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I wondered about we had this report that McLean County, their overnight stays were down an average of 30%. Okay, was there any cost analysis, any report on a cost analysis there?
Yeah, they did a cost analysis and it showed that it saved a lot of money. And not only did it save a lot of money, it was great for the county because like I said, the people were not put in prison, they were left out of prison, they could do their job. It was a win-win situation when they actually got to a point where they would, if their prisons were getting too crowded, they would tell the judges. And then the judges would really focus on, is this person really somebody we have to lock up? Or can we release them without bail because we don't have room for them and they are, working in the community and they need to be out in the community. So it was a win-win situation for everybody.
That sounds great. I'm curious what those other 4 counties did, if anything.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe they weren't held accountable. You know, coming from a community organizing aspect, one thing that every county has is people that have come out of the system. They call them returning citizens or something, you know. So where do they get to, how can they plug into the system? How can they plug into getting their stories told and their experiences? Now you can do it through community organizing groups that have them, but you know, so if you have a council where they're part of it and they have a seat at the table in helping to determine, you know, what goes on, then that's beneficial because they get left out. And I think a lot of that might fall on your state's attorney. Is your state's attorney just out to win cases, you know, or does the state's attorney want to work set up to where they work and they bring in the people who have experienced the problems, you know, and the people that work with them. And then how would that be coordinated? So this does give you a structure, like Brent says, it doesn't have to be mandated, you know, but it could. So it sets up a structure for where the police and the state's attorney has to work with everybody together with this council. But it would be up to, so you always have to say who's going to hold it accountable. You know, that's the only thing. Who holds it accountable? Is it the county board? You know, you have to have that accountability issues. I would say any county that has one of these put into effect, there also has to be who's going to hold them accountable. But
that said, I think Rachel said it really well. I think that there's no way you can mandate something like this for the whole state. I mean, right now you can't even mandate people to wear a blankety blank mask. I think we're beyond mandating, there will be a huge rebellion, especially in downstate. So I think that the better approach would be to look at areas that have done this, like McLean County, and maybe hold those up as models and talk about the cost savings they've had and the efficiencies, whatever, and recommend it to other areas. But I really don't think we're at a time and a place in our history and our state and our budget where we can mandate this across all the counties in the state. That would be a total disaster.
Well, if there's communication from one group to the other, then it will get to the point where the states compete to get, just like they're competing for grants, they would have their proposals and compete to get state funding for it.
Yeah.
And then their success would determine whether the state funding continued or not.
Yeah. And these things may be slow, like Madison County has a really good drug court, and other counties have probably looked at that and thought about whether they could do it, but it doesn't really mean that they'll implement it too. You hope they will, but
I think we just have to be careful about now, this won't sound right, but not letting the criminal justice system dictate everything that happens and dictate how sentencing goes, dictates who gets in, who gets out. We have to have citizen input, including the people that are experiencing the problems the most, have to have input into what a system looks like. Otherwise, we have this top-down system that's saying, this is how we do things, and if you don't like it, too bad. So, and I just think that is what is behind this. If we can, and maybe it's by lifting up, like you said, the models that work and say, look, here's what works, let's do it this way. But I
so
think
maybe we need to kind of take this question apart and respond to it in terms of, these are the pieces we think are very effective and would work throughout the state, to hold things up as a model and to recommend and to strongly recommend citizen input and advisory boards, but not to mandate anything, especially not to mandate things without a budget.
that McLean County League is really active, I think, aren't they, Joanne? I think that McLean County League is really active, and I bet they played a lot of role in making that happen. I can't hear you, Joanne, but.
Yes, I believe so, that they are, right.
Yeah, I bet they would be good to talk to.
With the local league holding them accountable, then it might work.
All right, so what do we want to do? Is there any more discussion on that, or can we? So we were supposed to cover 3 other questions tonight, which we didn't cover. So what I was proposing before was that we would have went through 3 other questions today. The first one, the 4th, and the 7th, and then our next one would have been policing, which I think is probably going to take up a whole time, or maybe policing and restorative justice together. But we haven't done these others. So how many times between now, we have December and the first part of January, we have to have a consensus done by the end of January. How many other meetings do you think we should have? How many other meetings are this kind of thing are you open to attending? Has this been beneficial? Maybe first we should say, have you found this beneficial?
I think it's been a really good discussion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been beneficial, yes.
So then what do you think? Do we want to schedule one until just do the other questions and then see how far we get and then do another one? Because right now we're looking at like 3 or 4 more to cover the question.
Well, we covered what, 3 questions?
3 questions today. The
and
first
it's only
one,
been an hour. So
no, it's been, what time? It's like 1.5 hours, isn't it?
hour and a half. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
not quite.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm just trying to get to see what we want to do here as far as time before because we could go back and read one of the other questions and look at it, but we haven't got it prepared for anybody. So,
and I think if people know ahead of time, like a couple days ahead of time, which questions we're going to deal with, we'll have time to go look at those specific questions instead of the whole Here.
I think that was kind of in the, wasn't that in what you put in the bulletin or some of the emails that
Yeah.
said, go and look at these?
Yeah.
It might
That's a good
help.
point.
Yeah, it might help if we actually said what the question was instead of saying number 1 and number 6, because then they have to go look it up. You know, I mean.
No, I
if-
included those in the announcement. It was like the basic question. we were
Yeah,
gonna
you
deal with.
did. All right, so how about this group, since I know you are all interested, set the date for the next, set the next date. I know Christmas, December is always extraordinarily busy. It should not be as busy now as usual,
We're not going to be able to go anyplace.
but do we want to do 1 in December, 2 in December? What? What do you
Well,
think?
we
Is
could do
December
one-
3rd, December 3rd, okay?
Is that the first Thursday? That would be a board meeting.
That's
Mhm.
board.
And the
Next
second Thursday is our holiday party.
Do we
Well,
want to
could
do,
it following Thursday, the 17th.
we're only gonna, yeah, we're probably only gonna get 1 in then, though. We
Mm-hmm.
can just make it longer, I guess, and people can stay on or drop off. Do we
Or
want to
we
do one after Thanksgiving? What about the week after Thanksgiving? Too soon?
Well, that's the
That's
week.
December 3rd, if it's a Thursday.
Oh,
but you
that's
can do
December
different-
3rd. Oh, no.
You could do a different day, I guess.
Yeah,
Mhm.
let's not do Thursday.
But remember, Wednesday, the 2nd, on Wednesday, we have that moderating the Nittany and Edwards statue thing.
Mhm.
Oh,
So,
How about a Monday night,
Monday would be all right.
the Monday after the 6th,
the
whatever
7th?
that is?
Monday, the 7th,
um,
is that what you're looking at?
I don't know. I don't have a calendar here.
I'm
Did the-
trying to figure out how to use mine.
Yeah, December
Okay.
7th is a Monday.
Yes.
Mhm. What do you think? December 7th?
Oh, let's go for it and see what happens.
Let's go for it. I'll see if Carol and John are available with their questions on December 7th. If not, then we will, and then someone has to take the one that Susan was doing because she's just having a hard time with some things right now. She was doing question 7, I think.
Okay.
And then we can also do policing. Does anybody, policing maybe could be broke up. Is anybody particularly interested in working on the policing one? Otherwise, I'll reach out to the committee.
What number is policing?
I think it's 6.
I'll be happy to check it out in that my ex-son-in-law is a captain in the Granite City Police Department.
Mhm. Might give you a different perspective.
And there's a Democrat named Parkinson who testified recently.
Okay, look at, let's do December 7th. I'm gonna see if John and Carol can cover their 2 questions, and then we'll get as far as we can on policing. Chris, you look at it, and we'll see if anybody else, let's see, Ann's doing restorative justice. If we have, since we have to do those other 2 questions first, I think if we do those 2 questions in policing, that's probably all we'll get done. You might be kicked to the next one. Yes, Chris?
I'd like to do that, but I just realized I have a Sierra Club
Oh, on the
group,
Monday, right?
executive committee meeting that I'm going to be very much involved in. So,
Okay. Well,
by the way, I'm throwing in the chat a note on our next virtual speaker series.
Okay, that's good. And we can use you on another question later if you're interested. Anybody that's not on the committee that wants to, but so then the next one we'll try to do 1 and 4, and then policing.
What number is policing?
Policing was 6.
6.
Oh, 6 and 7, because Susan didn't do 7.
Okay. So Carol,
yeah.
you might want to double check with John and Carol Gert and make sure they can make the date
Okay,
for that one. Let me know for sure which questions we'll include, and then I'll
Okay.
put those in the invite again.
we definitely will be doing it on that date, and we will send out to you what questions are going to be considered. Thank you.
By the way, Jane and I read a really good book recently on policing. I don't know, it's, Jane, what was the exact title of it?
It's called The End of Policing. It's by Alex Vitale. Vitale. And he has a chapter on, you know, the drug war, a chapter on homelessness, and a chapter on dealing with mentally ill people, a chapter on policing the border. I mean,
Thank you,
each
Chris.
chapter deals with a different topic, and so I don't know how the league has broken it down, but it might be useful.
Good, yeah, it's good prepping material.
Mhm.
All right, well, so we're almost at an hour and a half. I'm kind of pushing it for me tonight because I have to go to my friend who's on hospice and spend the night there, so, but it's
I'm going to
great
end the
to,
recording, but I'm going to leave the meeting up if anyone wants to look at the chat and the message that Chris put
great.
in about the Sierra Club meeting.
thank you, Becky.
Bye.